Good afternoon and good evening, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to see you all again and to host you again for our final session. I have a couple of housekeeping notes, just a reminder that we do offer a closed captioning. C'est un petit rappel que on vous offre la session sous-titrée et traduite. Donc, si vous avez besoin d'accès aux sous-titres, vous allez voir sur le bas de votre écran, il y a l'option Captions ou l'option sous-titres. Si vous cliquez Show Captions ou montrer sous-titres, vous allez voir une interprétation en anglais ou le sous-titre en anglais. Et si vous pesez la flèche vers le haut, vous allez voir davantage les options pour les différentes langues. Donc, vous pouvez mettre le français ou la langue de votre choix. So as I'm mentioning, we are offering, this session is closed captioned. So if you do require captions, I invite you to see below your screens where the Zoom options are, and you'll click Show Captions. And if you require translation, there's a number of languages in which the captions will be translated and subtitled. So just simply press the upward facing arrow and you will select Translate to the language of your choice. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Christophe Rivet. Christophe.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Stefan. Good afternoon, good morning, good any time of the day, wherever you're located. Thank you so much for attending this last session of the 3 days that we've dedicated to commemorating, marking the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. And this is a particularly relevant topic, and I'm very grateful that we have these wonderful panelists to debate this topic, the topic of sustainability. And it is particularly relevant to talk about it in the context of the convention because of the role of the convention in shaping those views around sustainability, identifying places that benefited from those views. And today we have to ask ourselves, in the face of so many changes, demographic, environmental, social, what role would these places and the World Heritage Convention play with regards to sustainability? How can we make that connection stronger and relevant in today's challenges? So to begin these discussions, we will be playing a video recording of Joyti Hosagrahar, who is the Deputy Director for the World Heritage Center at UNESCO. And we will have a short presentation on the topic of historic urban landscapes. Stefan.
Hello, I'm Joyti Hosagrahar. I'm the Deputy Director of the World Heritage Center at UNESCO. And I'm very pleased to join you today via this video message, and I want to congratulate you on this important conference to celebrate and mark the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. And this conference itself, I think, has a very interesting topic on the stories for the next 50. World Heritage at the forefront of climate resilience, sustainability, and decolonization. So let me begin my presentation. Let me take a second to share my slides and speak very briefly. So let me just... Okay, so I think you can see, I think you're not able to see my slides, so I have to try again. Let me try now. Yes, I think you're able to see my slides now. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of World Heritage in promoting sustainable development. And first of all, I want to point to this publication on culture for the 2030 agenda that looks at the role and contribution of culture to the 2030 agenda across all the 6 culture conventions and the 3 UNESCO recommendations on culture. And you can find different examples of very local level actions that contribute to sustainable development in the framework of these different conventions. I want to mention here also, and I think it's really important to recall the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy that was adopted in 2015 during the General Assembly of the States Parties to the World Heritage Convention. The idea was this was actually, this was developed almost in parallel with the Post-Millennium Development Goals Agenda, as it was called then. And this agenda, which eventually became the 2030 Agenda, was adopted in September of 2015, and the Sustainable Development Policy was adopted just a little before that by the World Heritage Committee, and then recommended, and the General Assembly adopted it in November of 2015. And this has 4 key dimensions that relate to World Heritage: environment and sustainability, inclusive social development, inclusive economic development, and fostering of peace and security. Now, another very important area that I would like to, and I'm just sort of going through the different ways in which we have been working with World Heritage and sustainable development. And so one area is this policy, which forms a basis and which has been mainstreamed into the operational guidelines, which is in the for the nomination dossiers. So it's, because it's mainstreamed into the operational guidelines and into all the processes and actions of the World Heritage Convention processes, because this was really the purpose of it, was that everything in the World Heritage processes should include a sustainable development perspective. This has been done. But furthermore, I want to point to another instrument which could be, which has been very important and continues to serve as a very important tool, which is the 2011 recommendation on urban heritage, on the historic urban landscape. The 2011 recommendation is very key because it is the recommendation that calls for the integration of heritage conservation with sustainable development plans and processes. And this is not only applicable for World Heritage, those sites inscribed on the World Heritage List, but also for those, for all cities and settlements. It's particularly for urban areas because it's looking at a complex set of issues, looking at built heritage on the one hand, natural environment and natural features, as well as the local community and their culture and intangible practices, knowledge that is part of this site. So it's also looking at the layering of history, because in many historic cities, you find sort of layers of history. There's also other layers in terms of the infrastructure, the geomorphology, the landscape elements. So all of this, looking at the idea of heritage in its larger setting, and looking also at the monuments with the ordinary built heritage, this is the historic urban landscape approach. And this is a very important approach and an important tool for managing urban heritage. So this important instrument is also one where we have really worked to align with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, also with other international agreements, including those on climate change or on the Africa, the Vision for Africa 2063. One of the things that we see with World Heritage Cities is also that the situation today that World Heritage Cities face with regard to climate change. The climate crisis is particularly critical in cities. Climate change today is across all World Heritage properties, both natural and cultural. One of the most most significant challenge and threat to World Heritage properties. And this is especially so for urban areas because it's where half of the world's population resides, and it affects directly the 90% of world's cities are coastal and are likely to be impacted by climate change during sea level rise, stormwater surges, flooding, and other climate-related disasters. So out of the 1,154 World Heritage properties currently inscribed on the World Heritage List, 320 are World Heritage cities, and nearly a third of these are along the coast or along, and historic cities are particularly at risk because many of them developed for historical reasons along coasts or along major rivers. So there's enormous significance for this kind of, for World Heritage cities and more generally for the protection of urban heritage and for sustainable development. One of the tools that we have developed for looking at local solutions to sustainable integrating World Heritage conservation with sustainable development is the World Heritage Canopy platform that provides examples of heritage-based solutions for sustainable futures. It includes a number of different case studies where innovative actions have been taken by historic cities and settlements that have been brought together and curated by the World Heritage Center. And they include traditional building practices, the integration of blue and green components in urban plans, support for traditional gardening practices in historic areas, climate action plans, sustainable mobility, number of different types of actions where small actions, a number of different solutions for local communities and their livelihoods on how knowledge, traditional knowledge and intangible practices have contributed to sustainable development in specific places. So from the different case studies which have been organized in thematically, and these themes relate to the themes of the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy and also to the themes of the UNESCO Culture 2030 indicators that I will talk about in a minute. And that it becomes very clear that the issues around economy and livelihood, governance and preservation, sustainability and resilience, small local actions can help to address these so that heritage conservation efforts can align with and contribute to sustainable development. And you can see these in English and French in the UNESCO website. So, for example, you can see here different types of solutions, such as in the city of Bamberg in Germany, traditional farming has helped to enhance food security and sustainability. In Bengaluru, improving water availability and sustainability for reviving traditional water systems. Now, Bengaluru is not a World Heritage, has no World Heritage site inscribed. However, the traditional practices are important, and these are historic wells. So we have some of the examples included are from places that are not on the World Heritage list, but can inform and inspire positive practices in World Heritage sites and cities. Another example is in Lyon, where Lyon in France, where integrating cultural and natural heritage values in urban development processes has been integrated into the management plan itself. So there's a number of such practices that can be found. There's more than 60 case studies, including several on climate change related issues. And here is one of them, which is a bit more in detail, looking at strengthening residents' connections with their gardening heritage in Bamberg, as I said earlier, where really the case study explores in detail how traditional knowledge systems have contributed to mitigating and adapting to climate change and to increase the resilience of the local communities. Historical settlements throughout the world have developed systems to manage disaster risk and minimize flooding. And these sort of lessons offer some solutions. So that regulatory systems, the integration of the land use plan, how has this been managed in Bamberg to enable this kind of traditional farming practice in the contemporary situation? Civic engagement, awareness raising activities that have been carried out for this, financing mechanisms to provide incentives for gardening families. How has this been put in place? Economic development, thematic tours and marketing campaigns, how have these contributed? So that there's a relationship between the kind of activities and actions, as I said, at the local level, heritage conservation and sustainable development. If you look at the state of conservation reports, one of the interesting things that we see in the state of conservation reports across all of the different reporting mechanisms that we have, we see that, I think I skipped one slide. Yes, that there are the properties under threat at risk because of climate change have been growing exponentially. As you see, the numbers have really increased in recent years. Another point that we see is that as far as Europe and North America are concerned, that list management and institutional factors as the most significant issue affecting the protection of the OUV of the World Heritage Property since 1979. There's a really huge proportion that focus on this issue, so that the management and institutional factors is 81% of the SOC reports. So that points us to the need for sustainable development solutions to be integrated. The mainstreaming since this period, the third cycle of the periodic reporting is ongoing in Europe and North America. You would know that the mainstreaming of the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy throughout the periodic reporting exercise has been undertaken at the national level and can be strengthened at the national level and at the local level. And at the national level, it's more at the level of the policies. It can be at the level of the perceived benefits when sites are nominated or achieving certain objectives. It's also using World Heritage sites as flagships to demonstrate the importance that national policies can support. General policy development and looking at sustainable development policies and strategies and integrating World Heritage the World Heritage Convention, and of course certainly the protection of World Heritage properties in them is also very, very key. Building capacities and international cooperation, and of course furthering good practices are all part of actions that one can take at the national level. At the local level, at the site level, enhancing the management plans and management systems, most significantly to ensure inclusion of local communities and indigenous populations in the decision-making processes, and also ensuring local livelihoods are supported so that communities are able to stay in place, so that local communities do not have to leave the place because the prices are rising due to tourism and hotels, so that the city itself kind of becomes emptied out, or World Heritage sites get emptied out of local populations and are simply become sort of shells for tourists. So these obviously are practices that are counter to the Sustainable Development Objectives. So certainly looking at also the impacts of new interventions, whether they are infrastructure interventions for transport or energy, renewable energy interventions, their impacts on World Heritage sites are very, very important in this. Finally, I just want to recall another tool that we have at our disposal that we have developed at UNESCO, which is the UNESCO thematic indicators for culture in the 2030 agenda, which is a set of 22 indicators that have been developed to measure the role and contribution of culture in the 2030 agenda for sustainable development at the national level and at the local level. So these can be measured also at the level of cities or settlements. And these indicators are grouped across 4 dimensions. As I said earlier, they relate also to the dimensions, the thematic areas of the Canopy platform, as well as the World Heritage Sustainable Development Policy. So the 4 thematic areas are environment and resilience, prosperity and livelihood, knowledge and skills, inclusion and participation. And 30 out of the 169 targets of the World Heritage Sustainable of the UN Sustainable Development Goals have been identified, and to these 30 where culture more directly contribute, and these 30 have then been rearranged, regrouped into these 4 thematic areas. And these thematic indicators, and we have been implementing them now, they've been implemented in 13 countries and 17 cities across the world. This is an important way by which it makes culture is made visible in the 2030 agenda, and it provides a thematic overview to see where it's contributing, not only culture as a sector of activity, but also transversally across other sectors. And it also helps to monitor the way that culture is contributing to the 2030 agenda, and to help advocate more for it. So with that, I can leave you with the resources if you want to look more into the Culture 2030 indicators. All right, well, with that, I want to just wrap up my presentation for today, and thank you very much. And we remain, please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any other questions. I leave you also with some resources that we have, a number of different guidance and documents related to World Heritage and Sustainable Development. Thank you very much.
Well, I would say thank you to Joyti. Well, I will say thank you to Joyti. This was a recorded video, but it had all the quirkiness of a live presentation. So this was great. Now we're going to move on to the next speaker. I will invite Dr. Eleanor Haine, Program Officer in Natural Sciences at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, the Canadian Commission being one of the partners in organizing this 3-day event. So I'm very grateful that you're here, and you're going to be introducing some of the key points related to that program. Dr. Haines.
Thank you very much, Christophe. So I'm just going to share my screen, my slides. Just bear with me while I get that set up. There, does that work? Should do. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to present. So I'm really going to be presenting on a project that I've been doing with the UK National Commission for UNESCO over the past couple of years. And it's really presenting the results of a report, Sites for Sustainable Development, realising the potential of UNESCO designated sites to advance Agenda 2030. And the context for the report, as we've been hearing over the course of this symposium, and we also heard from the Deputy Director, that people in communities worldwide are facing unprecedented challenges in the coming decades, from gender inequality and poverty to the catastrophic impacts of flooding and ecosystem collapse. Everyone will be affected. And so at no other time have more partnerships, resources and activities been needed at local, national and international levels to tackle these challenges. And that's what the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals are trying to do. This photo shows a tree and other debris in the flooded moon ponds at Fountains Abbey and Studley Royal UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it shows that, you know, the challenges like flooding as a result of climate change are impacting natural and cultural heritage. And it can damage the outstanding universal of the sites. We're going to hear more about that from Sarah France after my presentation. But the UNESCO designated sites, while they're under challenge by these sort of global challenges, they're also potentially areas of solutions to address those global challenges. UNESCO contributes to Agenda 2030 by linking the protection of natural and cultural diversity to sustainable development through its standard setting instruments and programs and networks. And World Heritage Sites, Biosphere Reserves and UNESCO Global Geoparks together give a complete picture of promoting our heritage, while at the same time conserving the world's cultural, biological and geological diversity and supporting sustainable economic development at the same time. And there are differences between the sites. So while World Heritage Sites promote the conservation of natural and cultural sites of outstanding universal value, Biosphere Reserves focus on the harmonised management of biological and cultural diversity, and UNESCO Global Geoparks give international recognition of sites with international geological significance that promote the importance and significance of Earth's geodiversity by actively engaging with the local communities. But altogether, these sites are involved and providing a complete picture of the conservation and protection of natural and cultural diversity all around the globe. UNESCO is increasingly grouping these three sites together as sites for sustainable development. And the purpose of doing the project that I did jointly with the UK National Commission was really to find out a couple of different things. Firstly, is the grouping of these sites together justified? And then secondly, are the sites reaching their potential to make significant contributions to addressing global challenges and therefore advancing Agenda 2030. Indeed, UNESCO calls its biosphere reserves as learning places for sustainable development. It calls the UNESCO geoparks or describes them as laboratories for sustainable development. And as we've just heard from the Deputy Director in the most recent operational guidelines for the World Heritage Sites, it states that protecting and conserving natural and cultural heritage constitute a significant contribution to sustainable development. So the project set out to explore this merit of grouping these three sites. The approach to do that was twofold. First of all, we did a review of how UNESCO's strategies, programme documents, and other grey literature position UNESCO designated sites. And then we did some original research, which comprised a survey, some case studies, an analysis of periodic reporting procedure results. So that's like the periodic reporting for World Heritage, the periodic reviews for biospheres and revalidations for geoparks. And we addressed 4 questions. So the first question asked, what values or tools do UNESCO designated sites share to tackle sustainable development challenges? So what we did for this is we looked through all the programme literature and strategies, and the commonalities between the different sites is that the sites all involve stakeholder and rights holder identification and engagement. the people managing the sites work with the stakeholders and rights holders to identify common concerns. They then develop iterative and adaptive management plans or processes, and they have monitoring and reporting processes. So as I mentioned before, those monitoring and reporting processes may be the ones that they have to do to maintain the UNESCO designation, but they may also be designed to assess progress towards the management plans. But what is really unique about being a UNESCO designated site is that these sites are also members of international networks of UNESCO designated sites. And they therefore reinforce those bridges between global and local that are so important for advancing sustainable development. And this gives this picture here really illustrates some community planning at the Manicouagan-Upishka biosphere in Quebec in Canada. And this is where community members have come together to identify their common concerns and to brainstorm strategies for tackling those concerns. The second question we asked was, what sustainable development challenges do sites face? In order to address this, what we did was we sent a survey to all the UNESCO designated sites of the 3 types in Canada and the UK. And the survey asked them to identify which sort of threats they are facing. And the list of threats used in the survey was that adopted by the World Heritage Committee for the 3rd cycle of periodic reporting, which sites in North America and Europe are going through at the moment. So it has 82 threats in 13 categories. And it's the first time that the same questionnaire has been applied to all sites. It was sent out in the summer 2020, and we had 41 out of 90 sites respond, which was quite good because we were right in the middle of the COVID-19 sort of lockdown stage at that point. And the results showed that the most frequently identified threats for the sites were financial resources, well, a lack of financial resources, the impacts of tourism, visitation and recreation, flooding, housing developments, storms, and lack of human resources. So these were the commonalities across the most commonly identified threats across those sites. So having established that the different types of sites face sustainable development challenges, we wanted to know, thirdly, what sustainable development challenges do the different types of sites share? So are there commonalities between biospheres, geoparks, and World Heritage sites? And are there commonalities between different countries? So when we analysed the responses we received, we found that within the top 5 specific threats that the sites had identified, there was a lot of commonality between the different types of sites. So you can see here that financial resources, or like a lack of financial resources, was a common threat identified by all 3 types of sites, as was flooding. And the impacts of tourism is common between geoparks and World Heritage sites. The impacts of forestry is a common concern amongst geoparks and biospheres. The different types of designated sites rank specific threats differently, and that's likely to be as a result of their particular emphases. Like, so World Heritage sites might have common concerns about housing development and commercial development, which might affect the eye lines for the sites of outstanding universal value. Biospheres are very much involved in the conservation of biodiversity, and invasive species is quite a highly identified threat for them. When we looked at the different countries, we found that Canada and UK sites face similar specific threats. So the top 3 threats across both countries were the same, but in slightly different orders. So what this tells us is that, irrespective of type of site and country, there are similarities in the threats that the different types of sites face. The final question was, what other challenges prevent sites from fulfilling their potential as sites for sustainable development? And so we had additional questions in the survey, which asked sites about their resources, their human and financial resources, and the sort of data they collect. And the survey results and case studies and a periodic reporting analysis all identified significant challenges when it comes to management and institutional factors such as human and financial resources. And that was mentioned by the Deputy Director just in the previous presentation. And we also found that a lot of the sites lack the data and tools that they need to monitor and report on sustainable development threats. Indeed, as you saw before, a lot of the sites identified flooding as a threat. However, when in the survey, we asked them questions about the sort of data they collect, and those sites identified flooding as a problem, did not necessarily collect any data about hydrology. So there's a mismatch between the threats they're facing and the data they're collecting. So from the overall study, what we found was that the biospheres, the geoparks, and the World Heritage Sites in the UK and Canada, there are valid reasons to group them together as sites for sustainable development because of the way that they work, and also that they face similar sustainable development challenges. But it also revealed they have significant challenges in actually fulfilling their role as sites for sustainable development, particularly when it comes to financial and human resource challenges. So the recommendations that came out from this report are that there need to be more opportunities for knowledge exchange and resource mobilization between the different types of sites. So that could be by, for example, having more opportunities for the sharing of best practices or partnerships between biospheres, geoparks, and World Heritage Sites across countries. And that could be done through the development of multi-designation thematic networks. Each type of designated site has its own networks, but there could be opportunity, for example, to develop networks for sites that are facing similar challenges, such as storms or flooding or other challenges. And then it's obvious that there needs to be more training for UNESCO designated site managers on data collection, analysis, management, and sharing so that they are better able to collect the data they need to manage their sites. And finally, and this is one of those issues which arises a lot, is that there needs to be more investment in the human and financial resource capacity of UNESCO designated sites to fully fulfill their role as sites for sustainable development. So I'll finish there. I'm looking forward to having further discussions in the questions. If you'd like to download the report, you can click on the QR code here, or we can probably put it into the chat as well. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. There were some interesting surprises in this, so I very much look forward to the conversation in the next few minutes. But before we get to that conversation, I'd like to invite Sarah France to say a few words, give us a presentation on Fountains Abbey and Studley Royal World Heritage Site. Mrs. France is the World Heritage Coordinator for that site.
Hey, no, thank you very much for inviting me along to speak tonight. I think Stefan's going to put my slides up. Hopefully. So I'm going to talk about the Scale Valley project, which is part of the Sites for Sustainable Development report that Ellie mentioned earlier. So it's all about delivering a sustainable future for the Scale Valley. If I could have the next slide, please. Thanks. So I was just going to do a quick bit of scene setting. I'm aware that I've just got a quarter of an hour, so I must try not to overrun. And then I was going to talk a little bit about the threats to landscape, people and nature along the Scale Valley, and then a little bit about how the project developed and how we've been able to work with partners to look at those threats and how we might tackle them together. And then if we've got time at the end, I was just going to mention a bit of shared learning that we've been doing with Rwenzori World Heritage Site in Uganda. Next slide, please. So just to give you a really brief bit of background about the site, it was inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 1986. The site's located in the north of England. It's quite near York, and we're only a couple of miles from the city of Ripon. The site is actually wholly owned by the National Trust. I don't know how familiar people are with the Trust, but we're a very large conservation charity. We have around 5 million members. And I'm employed by the National Trust as World Heritage Coordinator for the site. We're a big visitor attraction as well. We have around 600,000 visitors a year, so we're one of the biggest attractions in Yorkshire. I've just popped up a picture, and we saw one earlier of the water gardens in sort of full flood, but this is, we're inscribed for our 18th century water garden. But also, if I could have the next slide, please. But we're also inscribed for the ruins of Fountains Abbey. So Fountains Abbey was founded in the 12th century and then fell into a ruinous state as part of the dissolution of the monasteries in 1539. If I could have the next slide. And I think what's really interesting about the designation is, well, our inscription on the list is that the Abbey has this sort of dual role. So it's incredibly significant in terms of its as a monastic ruin, but it also has this key role in the design of the 18th century garden. And I thought this was just a really good picture because you can see the River Skell, which is part of what we'll be talking about in a minute, just sort of flowing through the site. Next slide. So basically, as part of my role as coordinator, I have to write a World Heritage Management Plan in common with all the other coordinators. We write ours every 6 years. And part of my role is to bring together partners to identify the key challenges facing the World Heritage Site and how we can really work together to tackle them. So in 2015, I have been at the Trust for about 12 years now, but in 2015, as part of the management plan, we held a workshop with a group of key partners, and they included Nidderdale Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, similar to national parks, a sort of landscape designation, the Environment Agency, Historic England, and a small trust called they're quite a big trust called the Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust. And that workshop was specifically about focusing on flooding and a big issue that we have with silt on the site as well. So if we could have next slide, please. So I just thought this was quite a useful slide because it just shows really how the river has sort of shaped, how it's been sort of manipulated really over time as part of the, well, early on, even as part of the setting up and laying out of the Abbey, the whole course of the river was moved. And then obviously it's been heavily altered as part of the design of the water garden. And you can see, even in this picture, you can see the silt or soil in those sort of water features. Next slide, please. So we saw this picture earlier actually, but we have a huge issue. It's one of the biggest challenges that we face on the site is from climate change. So the site has been impacted by flooding, well, over a long period of time, but we're seeing the events getting more frequent and more severe. And really it is one of the major threats to the OUV of our World Heritage Site. And I think this picture is really good as well in the previous one because it really shows that relationship between the world-class water garden and the river. So the gardens wouldn't exist without the Skell, the River Skell flowing through them, but at the same time, the river sort of is this huge threat. And that flooding impacts not only on the heritage and the World Heritage Site, but it also impacts on flooding downstream in the city of Ripon, and it also affects nature as well. So it has a whole range of impacts. Next slide, please. And the other issue that we have on the site is, I mentioned siltation. So I don't know if you remember the previous aerial photo. At the end, there's a huge lake, which is like a big showpiece for the water gardens. And we probably have to dredge this about every sort of 15 years probably, and this is a picture in 2010. We have to drain down the whole lake, so it has a huge impact. And I think, to me as well, what's important is that all that soil that is being deposited sort of within the World Heritage Site is all being washed off the landscape upstream. So that topsoil is incredibly important as well for the farmers upstream, as well as causing us sort of huge challenges downstream in the World Heritage Site. And it cost us around £500,000 to dredge this feature. So it's a very expensive process. Next slide, please. So this is just a map which shows the whole of the Skell Valley. And the bit shaded in brown is the World Heritage Site, right in the middle of the catchment. This is the only bit that we own of the site. And as I said, until we started to develop the scale project, we were very much just dredging, carrying out sort of repair works on our own land, just within that sort of brown area. But working with the farmers and working with our partners, we started to develop this idea that what we could do is work with the farmers and landowners upstream of the World Heritage Site to deliver what are called natural flood management measures. So these are things like tree planting, improving sort of soil management, and they slow the flow of the river, and they're also very, very good for nature. So the river, basically, the projects are basically, it's not just about the World Heritage Site, it was actually extended to include the whole sort of 12 miles of the Skell. So you can see it's all the moorland up to on the west side, and then Ripon, the city of Ripon's east. Next slide, please. So just to give you, for those that aren't familiar with the landscape that I sort of work within, this is just a picture of the farmland sort of upstream of the World Heritage Site that all lies within the AONB. And they've been a really important partner. They're the main partner that we're working on this project with. And they have a fantastic relationship with the farmers and landowners upstream of the site. So they've been incredibly important as a partner in the project. Just next slide. And then downstream of our site, just 2 miles downstream, we've got the city of Ripon, which, as I said, is also impacted by some of those flooding challenges that I talked about. Next slide, please. I think I just really wanted to make clear our project as well also has people at its heart. So it's not just about heritage and nature and landscape. As we started to develop the project from that initial group of partners, we started to talk to other partners, and we really started to have a lot of discussion with our local communities to get their input to almost creating the scope of the project. And I think there can be a perception sometimes that the area that we live and work in is quite an affluent area, but even within a city like Ripon, there are pockets of sort of childhood poverty, lower life expectancy, issues around loneliness and isolation. And all this is being exacerbated by the sort of cost of living crisis and COVID that we've been through. Next slide, please. And then some of the other challenges, I've linked these, I won't go through them all because I know I've got limited time, but I've linked these to the sort of sustainable development goals. So this is what the landscape, this is part of the problem of upstream, is to do with how the land is being managed upstream, which is threatening the health of the river, but also the heritage and the World Heritage Site. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. We also have a big issue as well that came out through the consultation around sort of nature is in decline along the valleys. This is the curlews and then the white-clawed crayfish that we have in the river. Next slide, please. We could have the next. And then there's an issue as well with other pieces of heritage along the valley. Next slide, please. And then, as I said, we did a lot of survey work. We went out and spoke to community groups. We phoned up and spoke to young carers. We engaged with all, we have sort of community networks in Ripon downstream. We talked to the farming community, and we started to ask people to try and identify what the barriers are that people face. And some of the ones that really came across through the consultation we did were about access to nature, heritage and the outdoors. So people don't know what there is on the doorstep, they don't have money to get into places, there's poor access to travel, a lack of information and confidence about going to the countryside. And working with our partners as well, we have 300 volunteers in the World Heritage Site that help us sort of manage and look after the site. But certainly there's declining numbers, and the diversity of volunteers was something we wanted to look at as part of the project. Next slide, please. So as we were sort of developing the project, we gradually got together quite a big partnership of 16 key organisations, which included community groups as well. And we worked up this vision for the Skell Valley, which was about heritage, it was about nature, it was about people being empowered to lead change. It was all about the long-term sustainability of the Skell Valley. Next slide. And then we took that sort of vision. This looks quite a big, complicated slide. So alongside sort of developing the project, we were also working on a big funding bid to the National Lottery. So the project cost £2.5 million, and it's all fully funded by the lottery through European funding and through other sort of foundations and donors. But those 4 themes, we were looking at things like landscape being resilient, nature thriving along the valley, heritage, and about empowering people. And I'll just focus on a couple, I'll just give a bit of detail on just a couple of those themes in the next couple of slides. The next slide, please. So I just thought the landscape is resilient. It's just a good sort of sustainability slide, really. So one of the strands of the project is called Healthy Land, Healthy River, and we have £460,000 to sort of spend on these natural flood management measures upstream, and that's working really closely with the farming community, and that's about making the river better for nature, protecting homes and businesses in Ripon, and also making our own sort of heritage more resilient. Alongside that, we looked at things like, we're looking at how we could maybe develop a payment by results scheme. So that's about recognising the service that the farmers are delivering for the tourism businesses and the homes and businesses in Ripon downstream. So it's making that connection between the farmers as sort of service deliverers and then these sort of beneficiaries. So making farm businesses more resilient through paying them for that service that they're delivering. Okay, next slide, please. And then, as I said, I won't go into this one because we haven't got a huge amount of time, but we did look at a whole range of sort of nature projects. And one of my favourites is the Hug an Ancient Tree, which is about engaging families and people of all ages to come out to the countryside and to come out to we have a fantastic deer park at Prentice Abbey in Royal, and just have fun exploring trees and wildlife. Next slide, please. Yeah, so one of our key sort of themes alongside all the landscape was very much this people are empowered theme. So we had, because it was lottery funded, we did manage to get some money almost to develop the project. And we very much wanted to work with communities to almost co-create the project. So rather than us just designing the project, we wanted to work with these groups. We did identify some key sort of beneficiary groups as well that we would work with, and we built in free training transport to try and overcome those barriers. And next slide, please. And these are just an example of some of the projects that almost sit under that people are empowered. So it's about nature near to where people live, engaging people in monitoring wildlife in the river, or a whole range of projects that sat under that theme. Next slide, please. And just to sort of finish up on the scale side, I hope I've really got across like what a big sort of partnership project it is, and how many different partners that we've sort of engaged, and we're now at the delivery phase of the project. So I mean, my role was sort of from 2015 to probably 2020. I mean, it did take 5 years to sort of pull together this project to do all the community and the partner work. We're now in the process, we've got all the funding in place now, delivering that project, which is really good to see. And I've just got one or two, just very, very quickly, I just thought next slide it would be worth it. We have been doing a bit of work as well with the World Heritage Site, Rwenzori World Heritage Site in Uganda, that's come up with through a sort of contact of a colleague through INTO, the International National Trust Organisation. And we're working with Rwenzori to sort of share good practice. We've had some workshops, and they're just such contrasting sites that it's been really, really fascinating to be part of that. The next slide. Yes, this is just a little example of the two sites, which are both sort of really suffering from sort of flooding and impacts of climate change. Next slide. And then, yeah, just to finish, that I think it's been a real positive of the project that we've been able to work as well with other World Heritage sites and through events like this to sort of share some of the learning, and the Sites for Sustainable Development report, which has been great. We've really enjoyed being part of that work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This was a really, really enlightening illustration of how we can work with local partners to address these big challenges. So before we get into a proper conversation, I think Stefan asked me to jot down a few ideas that might consolidate some of the big points that you raised, all of you. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully it will work. And I will share some thoughts on that might consolidate some of these points before we get into the conversation. So I'd like to title these thoughts as Maintaining Momentum, with the idea that the convention had a trailblazing role in pushing sustainability. And I think many of your ideas highlighted that. So I'm going to suggest to organize these thoughts in three big ideas: the convention as being a visionary tool, the convention as being a motivating tool, and the convention as being a leader. And that will probably guide us towards speaking about today's relevance of the convention. So the convention as visionary has to be understood in the context in which it saw the light of day. The convention came about at a time of disruption, where in the 60s and the 70s, post-war basically, there were conflicting ideas about the future and the place of humans on the planet. The idea of progress being the solution to so many of the ills of the past were ideas that were very, very strong in shaping the landscape, in shaping cities, and shaping the way that humans saw their role in the world. And it was really anchored into those, in the idea of progress, but also in the idea of consumption. These two images give us an inkling of that mindset. The top image is the demolition of various older buildings, i.e. from the 19th and early 20th century, to make way for the World Trade Center. And the bottom advertisement is one of the early advertisements to encourage recycling, and in this instance to encourage being aware of how our everyday behaviors may pollute and may damage our waterways, our environment. But where it's particularly visionary is that the convention has enshrined a series of principles that today we take for granted. But these principles were around protection, conservation, rehabilitation, science, knowledge, and function. And in particular, Article 5 is critical in encapsulating all of this. The first point of Article 5, the first idea behind Article 5 is that every state party to the convention should put in place the different tools that will enable the protection, the conservation, the maintenance, and the assignment of resources to preserve places of exceptional circumstance. And this is really critical because the convention is a legal commitment. So by establishing that basic principle, it invited all the signatories to embrace those ideas. When we get into the details of that article, we have these points about how natural and cultural heritage should have a function in the life of the community, that each place should establish one or more services for the protection, conservation, and presentation of cultural and natural heritage, recognizing that there's a level of professionalism tied to knowledge, tied to attention required, tied to investments that ensures that the long-standing values associated with these places are maintained. The idea that states should be capable of counteracting the dangers that threaten its cultural and natural heritage. So this idea that these places are not in isolation, there are pressures on them, and that in order to ensure their future, the actors that interact with these places should prevent these dangers and should adapt to respond to these dangers. To take the appropriate legal, scientific, technical, administrative, and financial measures necessary for the identification, protection, conservation, presentation, and rehabilitation of this heritage. So these points again here highlight the fact that in order to ensure the future of these places, we need to have the legal tools, we need to have the knowledge, we need to have the skills, we need to have the structure, we need to have the planning, we need to have the resources. All of this to understand how they live, how these places live, and how to preserve them in the long term. And that last point stresses again the need for training and scientific research. So I'm really just saying a few words on the convention on this particular article, because I do think that the convention, when it was adopted in 1972, was putting forth some very critical ideas that shaped the rest of the century and our way of thinking about places and people. And in fact, it set forward the principles, or many principles, tied to sustainability. The principle that some places have value that need to be protected because they play a role in the bigger picture of being human. The idea that there's more than just us as humans. That humans need culture and nature in their lives. That they are intrinsically tied to their environment and to their communities. That these places need to be taken care of for future generations. That's a specific expression that's in the convention. And that lastly, that these places can only be maintained collectively. These four principles are in the convention, and these four principles can easily be translated as principles of sustainability, as Joyti highlighted in talking about the SDGs, for example. But the convention was not just a visionary element, it became a motivator, and through two big ideas. The idea that where the sites, the World Heritage sites, were located, they became catalysts. And I think all the examples that were discussed and presented this afternoon highlighted that effect. These places are not islands. They are places that illustrate an element that is specific to a bigger picture, whether cultural or natural, or even both. And the excellence and the attention that we are putting on these places has the potential for a spillover effect. And here I have two examples of the idea of spillover effect. You have a historic core to a city, or you have the Rideau Canal on the left in Canada. And in each case, these are places in the heart of something bigger. And whatever happens to that heart has an effect to the outside. And lastly, and then the second main idea as a motivator is that the convention, because it's an international agreement, establishes certain key requirements. So it invites the signatories to abide by a series of basic tools and basic requirements that will meet the expectations of good practice, good care, and so on. And these requirements are having laws, having legislation that identifies, that protects, and that conserves these places that have exceptional value. The requirement to have expertise, to have individuals with knowledge, to have agencies and departments that have consolidated all that knowledge and in a place in order to interact with those places for the long-term care, that there are resources and that there are plans and that there's ongoing maintenance. All these requirements that are in the convention are tied to the idea of sustainability, the idea that you have to understand how things are happening to a certain place in order to maintain it over time, that you need to establish plans, that you need to invest in them, that you need to have a framework to protect. So this is a very powerful effect that perhaps we may not appreciate, having been so invested in one tool. We may not appreciate how much the convention has had a motivating effect on the bigger picture of how we understand sustainability and how our human and natural environments have benefited from that. And lastly, in terms of the convention being a leader, these two previous points were very much looking at how it all started, how it shaped things over time. And now I'd like to suggest a few points about how it can lead the future. And I think our three presenters before me introduced many of these ideas, and I look forward to the conversation in a few seconds. But the 4 points that I'd like to introduce as potentially a contribution for the convention to continue to be a leader in sustainability is to address the perceived distinction between nature and culture. And both ICOMOS and IUCN have been working for years, as well as UNESCO, to explore that close relationship. I think we are at a time in our history where we have no choice but to find an approach and embrace an approach that ties both concepts together. The second element, which was illustrated just a few minutes ago by Sarah, is the idea that these sites are fountains of knowledge to deal with climate change. So whether it's a natural or a cultural site, there are many elements of the attributes associated with these sites and the value that they represent that speak to past histories of adaptation, and that may provide ingredients to deal with the future of a changing climate. These places are all about inclusivity and diversity. And we tend to forget how the pressures of the modern world and the forced migrations for different circumstances become stressors, and how these sites, the World Heritage Sites, can remain beacons of the importance of these values of cultural diversity and inclusivity. And lastly, the idea of localized economies. Tourism is an obvious example, but there are many other consequences to investing in these sites specifically, in creating economies that are not tied to the globalized definition of an economy, but very much so in response to the direct circumstances. And I'll leave you with one last idea that I think encompasses everything that we've talked about until now, is the idea that these places can illustrate a concept of ecosystem, that they are ecosystems, not just within the boundaries of the sites, but as part of something much bigger. There are ecosystems in the connections, in the natural connections that they represent, in the connections with the different cultures that are associated with these places. There are ecosystems that create economic opportunities, and there are ecosystems in strengthening social ties. So I'll leave it at that as a summary, but I think, and my computer is very slow at responding. I wanted to summarize these 3 points and perhaps use them as a launch pad for the conversation. I think each one of you has talked about certain of the elements, but I'd love to hear a few more of your thoughts on the idea that the convention and these World Heritage Sites can be motivators and leaders in shaping the communities. Can I ask perhaps Eleanor, do you have any reactions to that?
I really like what you said about the sort of inclusion and diversity aspect. One of the things that really came out from the work I did on the reports, Sites for Sustainable Development, was that bridging global goals with local people can't be achieved unless you're involving all the rights holders and stakeholders, and all those management processes need to be participatory in nature. We work a lot in Canada with Indigenous peoples. They're rights holders a lot, on the land they have, and working with starting off with identifying all the different stakeholders and rights holders is really important, because they're the ones who are going to be able to tell you actually there are trade-offs between these different things that you're doing. So for example, if you're wanting to do a project related to food security, then you have to be very careful, that because there could be trade-offs then in terms of the intact terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems relating to whatever projects you're going to be doing. So it's having that involvement of local communities, making sure everybody's got a seat at the table, everybody has a voice, which is so important for affecting sustainable development. And I think that the way that the convention has evolved and changed, and particularly in those in the questions that come through the periodic reporting processes, I think it really is pushing in that direction, that it does lead now in having those approaches, and especially when it comes to the policy on integrating a sustainable development approach into the World Heritage Convention acknowledges that you need to go outside the boundaries of the site in some instances in order to ensure you've got everybody at the table for management plans. So I think it's I really like what you said on that. So I'll stop there for the moment so Sarah has a chance to speak too.
Of course, thank you. Sarah, any thoughts?
Oh, sorry, just trying to start the video, a bit delayed. It's absolutely fascinating hearing you talk about the convention in that way. I've learned a huge amount this evening. I mean, one of the things I'm really interested in, I guess, that our site sort of personifies in a way, and I think it's fantastic about the convention. I mean, I've worked for a long time with national parks before sort of coming to work with the trust, but it's the whole sort of nature culture and that, jointly looking at them together, because I think our site just personifies just how critical that sort of relationship is. And it's quite interesting working for an organisation like the National Trust. We work with a lot of groups like Natural England, who specialise in sort of nature. We have Historic England to do the heritage, but across the trust, we have a whole, whenever we deal with any sort of management issues on site, we work as a group of specialists, ecologists, curators, to managing those. And I thought that was, really, really interesting.
So there are a couple of things that struck me in both of your presentations that I'd like to have your thoughts further on that. First off, Eleanor, when you were talking about how people perceive the pressures to the sites, and they looked at funding as well, at least in the Canadian and UK sites, funding being the #1 issue, and then there were other environmental matters, but the human and that reality. It struck me because it felt administrative, but in fact, where I think this meant to go, and perhaps you'll interpret it better than I'm perceiving it, is the idea that we're not making those places a priority, and that perhaps we're not investing in those places at the level that their importance represents in our lives. And it's not just the idea of heritage level, it's the idea of what it means to us. So can you and I'd like after that, Sarah, to also share your thoughts on that, because what you were describing, I think, has some connections. But Eleanor, can you interpret that element first?
Yeah, and I think it relates to what you were saying, Christophe, about the World Heritage Convention as being visionary and a motivator. It does motivate people to engage with local communities and to do have these participatory approaches at landscape levels to sustainable development. But like you said, and the report showed, that the financial resource challenges lead to human resource challenges. Without the consistent funding, the sites are finding it very difficult to have enough people employed to be able to really well, do the kind of participatory approaches to sustainable development really well. Because sometimes, I mean, we had a sort of free comment box in our survey where people could elaborate if they identified different threats a lot of the comments were like, we've got short-term funding, it's project-based or it's program-based, and it's not. And so, you know, it might last for 2 or 3 years, and we've trained somebody up, and then they have to leave. And so, you know, often they're required to make a management plan that might last for, let's say, the cycle of periodic reporting, which would be 6 years, or for a geopark it's 4 years, or biosphere it's 10 years, and they have these, you know, these management plans which they make for a particular period of time, but then they lose staff in the middle, and they can't necessarily guarantee that they're able to have the staff there, you know, a few years down the line to review their management plan and adapt it based on changing circumstances, like increased flooding or that sort of thing. So so the point about the human and financial resources is just that you know, in order to invest in these sites, if you invest in these sites, you're investing in those long-term innovation. You know, they are innovative sites for sustainable development. They are developing management plans, and they're doing it in really exciting ways. But without the staff to keep that going, and to be able to be sure that you're going to have the staff there to review those management plans, they're really struggling. So that's where it was leading, really. Yeah.
Okay. Sarah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I said at the beginning, it's taken 5 years of my time just to develop that, you know, the scope of that project, and all the investment in sort of developing the partnership working is just huge. And I've been coordinator at Prentice for 12 years. And I think what stood us in brilliant stead with this project, when we came to look to partners to help us deliver the issue, was that we had a sort of mechanism in place where we have a steering group, and we have a wider stakeholder group of about 50 key stakeholders that we get together once a year at the World Heritage Site. We offer them lunch, take them around the site. And so that sort of partner engagement, as you're saying, if you've got this turnover of staff, or you can only fund the staff sort of through the project, it's also potentially sort of losing some of those that consistency with your partners. And I think that relationship is just so important. I mean, we had to invest a huge amount of our own sort of time before we got any funding at all. But because it was such a big issue for us, we were happy to make that commitment. I mean, with the lottery, once you get the funding, you are able to get staff who are able to help, you know, do a lot of the community participation work. And a big thing for us now that we've started delivering the project, and we have a sort of project manager in post so that I can get on and write the next management plan for the World Heritage Site, is we're really having big discussions about legacy. So, you know, we've set up this partnership of 16 organisation. What is the future for that? We're going to put all this natural flood management infrastructure in above the, you know, outside of our land on private individual. How are we going to maintain all that infrastructure? So yeah, I think it's it's a big challenge, definitely.
So one last thought that I'd like to hear you react to, because I'm really struck by the impact that your work has, Sarah, in both the physical dimension and the societal aspects of your region. And I'm always wondering whether we appreciate the value of these sites because they're exceptional, because they can play a role as a canary in the coal mine if there's an issue, or because they are illustrative of how we do things in our country. What are they exceptional because they stand out, or are they exceptional because they are they are illustrative of who we are and what we do in our countries?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think one of the strengths, I'm probably not going to answer this in the right academic way, but I think one of the strengths that I found with working within our World Heritage Site is that local people, that we have a lot of there is a real sort of passion and love for the place. You know, the Fountains of Studley Royal Estate, it's where people propose marriage to their people want to get married there. When they die, they want their ashes, you know, they write things. We have a memory book. You know, it has a huge, people have a huge emotional sort of connection, I think, to the site. So it's been a great way of the fact that, I'm not saying it makes it easy, but the fact that I work at a place that people put so much value on, the sort of intangible values as well as the tangible values of the World Heritage Site, I think there's a really, that's how we sort of pull together all our partners really, and our communities. There's that sort of spirit of place of Fountains of Studley. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, absolutely. Basically, I was trying to hear your thoughts on when you talk about these places and highlight their value, to bring in partners, to start projects, to, you know, how do you talk about them as having value? And you've just described, you know, the emotional connection. So there's something very local and very ingrained in something deeper that's exceptional locally.
Yeah, I mean, at a very basic level as well, it does help with things like funding bids as well when you have an internationally important site that's at risk. That's certainly, so the World Heritage inscription certainly helps with that process as well. So,
Elaine, any thoughts? Any final thoughts, probably, because we only have a few minutes left.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate what Sarah said about Fountains Abbey. As you can probably tell, I'm a British Canadian, and Fountains Abbey is one of my favourite places in the world. I lived in Yorkshire for quite a long time before I moved to Canada. And one of the things about it, I think, is just, you know, it's about memory making, and it's about sense of place and attachment. But then it goes from people who are visitors like me to people who are local. And I think one of the things I think, that's just my little tangent about Fountains Abbey and how much I love it. But just a final thought really is, I think that, you know, and I mentioned this in the report, and I can't stress it enough. You know, Sarah mentioned how the UNESCO brand can attract funding. The UNESCO brand also puts into place this you know, ability to be part of these international networks and be recognized for being exceptional, outstanding, or, you know, sites of international geological significance or whatever. And having that opportunity to network really does mean that there's this huge opportunity for knowledge sharing, for sharing best practices, like Sarah illustrated with the cooperation they're doing with the Rwenzori site in Uganda. And I think, you know, we live in this kind of globalized world where we're all local people working on local projects, and there's a lot of globalization. But I think this is where, you know, the World Heritage Convention is visionary in bringing these sites together globally under the same umbrella. But that leads to this cooperation, and I think that is a huge value to the global community, because it is lots of local projects that are all contributing to a global goal. And I think it's something really, really special to celebrate. And I think that, you know, the past 50 years, the convention is still relevant. It's maintained its relevancy over the last 50 years. And I think from what we've been hearing across this whole symposium series, it is still relevant today, and it's going to be relevant for the next 50 years. So you know, going back to the first question you asked me about finance, I think, you know, like the next step is how do we convince the people with the wallets to keep investing in it, and how do we collectively raise the visibility of the convention and the work that it does in order to convince them that that's very important.
Well, thank you very much, Eleanor. There were a lot of quotables in those final thoughts that really set the stage for how we can think about the convention into the future. I can't say that we'll meet again in 50 years to talk about whether we were successful in our prescient discussions, but I'm really grateful for the exchange that we had. I just want to finish on a very neat note, if I can. Stéphane, could you share the story map? So over the course of the past 3 days, we had a a colleague, Kara, who was recording the stories in this visual illustration, a story map. And I will invite you to visit that story map and add your thoughts. Just add sticky notes, share how you react to some of the things that you heard, share your aspirations about the future, share some neat emotions and ideas tied to perhaps some of the sites you visited or that you've been to. Either way, this is quite a neat way to encapsulate everything that's been shared over the past 3 days. I see the word urgency really stand out in red. I'm hoping that that's not the big word that stands out from all the conversations that we've had. To conclude, I really want to thank everyone who has put up so much effort to organize the past 3 days. I'll thank in particular Stéphane and the entire team that's worked on this. I'll thank Parcs Canada for being such a strong partner, as well as the Canadian Commission to UNESCO. This has been a rare occasion for all of us to come together over something that we all care about. And it's also a rare occasion globally to be talking about something that has had an impact on all of us for the past 50 years, and that evidently has much to offer yet. Yes, so I'm very thankful for this. Stéphane, I don't know if you have any final words to direct people towards websites to get more information or anything like that. But thank you to everyone. And Stéphane, if you could close, please.
Thank you, Christophe. Again, thank you very much to our partners for helping us with the successful event. It was we've had over 25 speakers in 7 sessions, and we were joined by over 350 people all over the world. So we're very excited and very, very, very proud to share this with you. Finally, we've received a lot of requests from different colleagues who were not able to make it to the session. So I want to let you all know that the sessions were all recorded and are available on demand. So the Eventbrite is still open. So the event link is still open. And so if you'd like to access it, you will have access to the event portal to see all of the recorded sessions. As well, you'll have access to the story map. So if you'd like to participate and put in some sticky notes, you can put in your thoughts and so on, and we will see it all. And finally, the registration is still open, even though there's no more live sessions left. And so if you do have any colleagues who you think would benefit from getting access to the material, they can simply register on the Eventbrite, and they will have access to the portal. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, have a beautiful weekend.